"Are you sure?" the registrar asked one last time. She didn't answer. She gripped the pen until her knuckles turned white. The fluorescent light above her hummed faintly like something dying. The room smelled of old paper and silent judgment. Then she signed. Emma Whitfield, heiress to the Whitfield Group, daughter of one of the state's oldest fortunes, had just married a man in scuffed boots and an oil-stained jacket. She heard the muffled laughter behind her. She felt the weight of every gaze in that gray government office boring into the back of her little neck. She's lost her mind. Poor thing. What have they threatened her with? But then, just as the man next to her reached for his pen, every telephone in the room began to vibrate at once. A tremor ran through the small crowd. People reached into their pockets, looked at their screens, and their expressions changed. Confusion, disbelief, alarm. The markets had moved. Something huge had just happened in the financial world. A name hidden for a decade, buried beneath shell companies and purposefully erased headlines, it had resurfaced. Emma didn't look at her phone. She looked at the man beside her, the calm of his jaw, the steady hand as he signed. He signed his name, Daniel Hay, without hesitation, without theatricality, without even a hint of expression. Then he capped the pen and set it down on the table with perfect stillness. Emma didn't know it yet, but the man she'd just been forced to marry was the reason every phone in this room was ringing. The Whitfield Group had been Emma's legacy and her prison in equal parts. She had grown up understanding two things: that her family name carried tremendous weight in this city, and that the price of carrying it was total obedience. Her father, Jarek Wood, ex-positive. Gerald Whitfield wasn't cruel like monsters. He was cruel like architects. Precise, structural, convinced that every wall he built was for someone else's protection. It was a Tuesday in March when he called her at the library. She'd been living in the apartment of the family's East Wing since her return from London, where she had spent 3 years building a small but genuine career as a financial analyst. She was good at it, more than good at it. But Gerald had called her home 6 months ago with a single sentence: "The company needs you here." And Emma, who had never quite shaken off the gravity of that house, had come. The library smelled of leather and lemon wax. Her father was sitting behind his desk. Her stepmother, Patricia, stood by the window with her arms folded, looking out over the garden as if none of this required her direct attention. Emma's uncle, her father's younger brother Clifford, sat in the armchair in the corner swirling a glass of something amber. "Sit down, Emma," her father said. She sat down, told him the truth without preamble, which was his version of mercy. The Whitfield Group wasn't just in trouble, it was collapsing. 3 failed investments in a row, a leveraged buyout gone badly wrong, and the quiet but devastating withdrawal of a major institutional partner. They had been exposed in a way that years of reputational hardship could not hide. In 6 weeks, unless something changed, they would be forced into a structured bankruptcy. Emma listened. She felt the ground shift slightly beneath her feet. "There is a solution," her father said. She had not expected what came next. There was a man, an indirect creditor through a chain of holding companies, who had agreed to extend a crucial lifeline to the Whitfield Group, not in exchange for shares or payment terms, but in exchange for something else, a marriage. Emma stared at him. "His name is Daniel Hay," Gerald said. I know what a transactional marriage is," Emma said flatly. "I'm asking what you think I would agree to one." "Because the alternative," Clifford said from the armchair, without looking up from his glass, "is for all this to disappear. The company, the apartment, the foundations, the staff, everything. Galasium." Patricia turned away from the window. "We're not asking you to love him, Emma. We're asking you to be practical. Who is he? Her father's pause was almost imperceptible. He's a single father, a local man. He has a daughter. He lives simply. He's poor, Emma said. He's modest, Gerald said carefully. He's poor, she repeated. What are you telling me? You want me to marry a man who has no money to save a company that has no money? The deal is done, her father said. The paperwork is ready. She looked at the three of them. Her father studied composure, Patricia's careful blankness, Clifford's glass. Price for keeping all these, she said slowly. It's me. No one corrected her. The registry office was small, echoless, and smelled of old paper. Daniel Hay was already there when Emma arrived with her aunt as a witness. He was taller than she had imagined, thin, with dark hair that needed a trim and a jawline that was stubble for a day and a half. His jacket was clean, but visibly old. His boots were scuffed at the heels. He kept his hands loose at his sides. He looked at her as she entered, not with eagerness, not with triumph, not with the cautious hope of a man who knows he is receiving something above his station. He looked at her with a kind of careful firmness, like a man who had already decided how the day was going to unfold and had prepared, made peace with it. She didn't speak to him before the ceremony, barely looked at him. Are you sure? The pen, the signature, the laughter she didn't turn around to face, and then it was over. Daniel Hay lived 20 minutes from the center of town in a neighborhood that had once been working class and was now in the ambiguous middle stages of other people's gentrification. The houses were small. The trees were big and old. The street was quiet in that way. That's particular to places where people actually live their lives instead of acting them out. His house was a 1940s craftsman bungalow with a green front door and a porch that dipped ever so slightly to the left. The yard was unkempt. A bicycle leaned against the side fence. Wind chimes crafted from driftwood and sea glass were hanging from the eaves of the porch's roof. Emma paused at the front door with her single rolling suitcase that she packed for a 2-week trip because she hadn't allowed herself to think any further and looked at the house for a long moment. Daniel opened the front door and held it open. She stepped inside. The interior was small and unassuming. The ceilings were low, and the floors were of original wood, worn down to a warm, honey-like color. The kitchen was visible through the front door, a yellow stove with copper pots hanging from a shelf, a fruit bowl on the counter, and a child's drawing of a lobster pinned to the fridge with a magnet. It was clean. That was the first thing Emma noticed, and she hated that it surprised her. The second thing she noticed was the little girl. She came down the hallway, 8 years old, small for her age, with her father's dark hair and an expression of utterly unguarded curiosity. She was wearing a T-shirt featuring a diagram of the solar system, and held a book about deep-sea creatures in her hands. She looked at Emma. Emma looked at her. "Hello," the little girl said. "Are you going to live here now?" "Lily," Daniel said quietly but not abruptly. "Yes," Emma said, "for now." Lily considered him with the focused seriousness of someone filing files, information carefully. Then he said, "Do you want to see my room?" "Maybe later." "Okay." Lily looked at her father. "Dad, she's pretty." "I know," Daniel said. Emma looked away. In the days that followed, Emma mapped the geography of the house and its rhythms, as if she were a spy cataloging a foreign territory. Daniel woke at 5:30. She could hear him, not clearly but as a silent figure, moving through the morning, man. By the time she went out at 7, the coffee was already made, and there was food, eggs, toast or fruit, whatever was in the house. He never announced it. He just left it there. She ate it because she was hungry. He was a mechanic. He worked at an independent repair shop 3 blocks away. The kind of place with a hand-painted sign and a parking lot that didn't smell perpetually of motor oil. He left every morning at 7:15, returned at 6. On Tuesdays, he picked Lily up early from school for her swimming lesson. On Thursdays, he helped with something at school. She figured it was a science club. He didn't ask Emma for anything. He didn't impose his schedule, did not explain himself. This, in its own way, seemed more disturbing to him than the hostility would have been. One afternoon, he came home to find the heels of a pair of Italian leather pumps he had worn to a meeting badly scuffed on the left side where they had caught on a curb by the door. Mended. The scratch was invisible, the leather polished. He picked them up and examined them. He said nothing about it at dinner. He said nothing either. Lily was talking about a documentary she had seen in school about hydrothermal vents at the bottom of the ocean. There are creatures living there that don't need sunlight at all, she said, with the evangelical conviction of a recent convert. They just use chemicals from the rocks. They've been living down there for maybe 1 billion years. They may have been living down there for 1 billion years. 1 billion years, Daniel said. Perhaps that is what scientists believe. Dad, could something be living at the bottom of our ocean that we haven't found yet? Probably. Probably yes, or probably maybe. Most likely yes. Lily looked pleased. She looked at Emma. What do you think? Emma paused. I think the ocean is largely unexplored. New species are discovered every year. Lily stared at her. Do you like the ocean? I don't know it well enough. Could we go sometime? Lily said, with the magnificent ease of a child who doesn't understand that some things are complicated. Daddy takes me to the shore sometimes. There's a place with tidal pools. Emma looked down at her plate. Maybe she hadn't said no. It was the first time she hadn't said no. Emma was not a woman who ignored inconsistencies. It was what had made her good at financial analysis, the ability to look at a balance sheet and sense in some pre-verbal way that something was amiss before she could articulate exactly what it was. A number in the wrong proportions. An assumption that didn't hold up. A structure that looked solid from one angle and was showing its fractures from another. She had started to feel that feeling around Daniel Hayes about 3 weeks into their deal. She had started dead small. She had been on a video call with a colleague, a former colleague. Now his job in London hadn't survived the move home, and he had been trying to rebuild some kind of consulting practice out of the Whitfield family network. RJ network. The call was about a real estate investment trust that was being restructured, and she had been debating the merits of a particular debt and equity position. She hadn't realized Daniel was in the kitchen until the call had ended. She went in to refill his coffee and found him washing dishes, seemingly unfazed. Excuse me, she said, was I speaking too loudly? She didn't pour herself any coffee. The swap structure they're proposing, he said, without turning it around, only works if the underlying performance assumptions hold. If their cap rate projections deviate by more than 40 basis points, everything reverses. Oh. She turned to look at him. She was rinsing a glass. She didn't look up. That's it. She paused. That's a very specific point. You were speaking loudly enough, he said. Where did you learn about cap rates? She put the glass in the drainer. I read that somewhere. She studied him for a moment, till she dried her hands on a table and left the kitchen. She stood there while her coffee grew cold. 2 weeks later, a phone call. She came in from the garden. She had taken to taking her morning calls outside because the light was better and the air helped her think. And she found Daniel on the phone in the hallway. He caught snippets. The Singapore position. I said, hold it. Don't touch it until I say so. The Harris acquisition. No, stand down. The liabilities are not valued. Tell them I'm unavailable. I won't be available. Do you know why he hung up? Just as she walked through the door, he looked at her blankly. Work? She asked. Yes, he said. He went to the garage, put on his overalls, and drove to the shop. That afternoon, he opened the financial news on his laptop and looked up the Harris acquisition, a mid-sized logistics company that had been the subject of a bidding war for the past month. By 6 a.m., the leading bidder had pulled out. By morning, the deal was dead. She sat very still in her home office and thought about a mechanic in the hallway telling someone to back out of an acquisition that had subsequently collapsed. She thought about the comment about the cap rate that repaired shoes, the yellow stove, the lobster magnet, and the driftwood, wind chimes. Things that don't add up, she thought. She didn't confront him. Not yet, but she began to pay attention in a different way. The attack, when it came, was surgical. Emma learned about it on a Wednesday morning. A coordinated campaign by a competitor. A group of holding companies led by a man named Preston Hale, who had been stalking the Whitfield Group's weakened position for months, had brought about the sudden withdrawal of 3 remaining institutional lenders. By noon, the company's lines of credit had been cut off. By 3 p.m., her father was calling her in a voice she had never heard before. Weak, stripped of all composure. "It's over," he said. She didn't tell him not to say that. She wasn't sure he was wrong. The rest of the day was spent in calls that went nowhere, emails that went unanswered, and a series of conversations with lawyers who spoke in a hierarchical language that implied there was only some clear path out of this. By nightfall, she had stopped trying to think of solutions. She sat in the living room of the small bungalow. Daniel was picking Lily up from swimming. They had been delayed. She had the house to herself, and for the first time in years, she allowed her to simply be afraid. The Whitfield Group had its failures, its cruelties, and its architecture of control, but it had also been, in a fundamental sense, the structure beneath everything else. Without it, her father would have nothing. Patricia's carefully maintained world would dissolve. The Foundation's charitable programs that she had to admit were genuinely good. Regardless of how they were used socially, they would end. Hundreds of people who worked for the company would be laid off. She covered her face with her hands. Heard the front door, looked up, quickly composed herself, or tried to. She knew her eyes were red. Daniel entered first, saw her face, didn't say anything right away, which she appreciated. Lily ran past him toward her room, already narrating something about a butterfly kick to no one in particular, and the house was briefly filled with the sound of a child existing noisily in a small space. "Bad day," Emma said. It wasn't a question. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked. He nodded, went into the kitchen, heard him moving. After a while, he emerged with 2 cups of tea, not coffee, which she usually preferred, but somehow tea was what the moment called for. And he sat down on the couch across from her and didn't say a word. They sat like that for 20 minutes as Lily's voice drifted from her room explaining something at length to her stuffed animals. Emma didn't cry. She almost did, but she didn't. "It's going to collapse," he said finally. He cupped his mug in both hands. "Sometimes things collapse. The company, my family's company, everything my grandfather built. Is the company what you wanted?" he asked. She looked at him. "Is it what you wanted, or is it what you were supposed to want?" She didn't answer. She wasn't sure she knew the answer. He didn't press the issue. She slept poorly that night, waking at 4 a.m. To find the house dark and silent. She went to the kitchen to get some water and noticed through the window that Daniel's truck was gone. She stood at the window for a long time. In the morning, the news came. An anonymous investment fund operating through a Luxembourg-registered holding company with no public directors had moved quietly but decisively to take the Whitfield Group's place. It had bought the debt from retired creditors at a premium, restructured the remaining debt, and extended a full operating bridge to the company. No terms had been made public. The Whitfield Group was saved. No one knew who had done it. Emma sat at the kitchen table with her coffee and the news open on her laptop and looked across the empty seat where Daniel Hayes ate breakfast each morning and felt something cold run through her. The annual Hardwell Foundation Gala was the kind of event Emma had attended every year since she was 16. It was held in the ballroom of a hotel that had been old when her grandmother was young and attracted exactly the kind of people who measured their worth by the size of their table and the brand of their suit. She had tried to avoid going this year. She had tried 3 different excuses, but her father had been specific. Her absence would be interpreted as a sign of weakness, and the company couldn't afford any more of that right now. She hadn't planned on bringing Daniel. He had offered. She had looked at him, the overalls he had just taken off, the dark crescent of grease under a fingernail that hadn't quite come out, and she had said, "No way, you don't have to." "I know," he had said. "Do you want me to come?" He had thought about walking into that room alone, the questions, the stares. "Yes," she had said, surprising herself. He was wearing a dock suit. She didn't know where it had come from. It was well cut, which surprised her, although she tried to tell herself that it shouldn't. He didn't say anything about her dress, which was floor-length, navy blue, and had taken her 40 minutes to decide on. He had simply looked at her as she emerged from the bedroom and said, "Ready?" She wasn't ready. The hotel lobby was packed when they arrived. Emma recognized faces immediately. Board members, old family friends, competitors in the masks of colleagues. She felt eyes finding her, and then, with subtle but unmistakable curiosity, sliding to the man beside her. The first incident occurred in the coat check. A young, cocky member of the security staff, wearing a rented tuxedo, stepped directly into the path of Daniel. "Sir, may I see your invitation?" Daniel reached into his jacket pocket. Emma, half a step ahead, turned. "You're with me," she said. "Of course, Miss Whitfield." The man stepped aside, but not before his face showed his assessment. The second incident occurred at cocktail hour. A man named Garrett Weston, the kind of man who had never distinguished between networking and hunting, spotted from across the room and approached with the easy confidence of someone who had never needed to be invited anywhere. Emma kissed him on the cheek. Her eyes were already on Daniel. "Then this is my husband, Emma said. Something crossed Garrett's face. He recovered quickly. "Sure, I heard." She held out her hand to Daniel. "What do you do?" "Mechanic work," Daniel said. Garrett's smile didn't change. "Good for you." He walked away. The third incident was the one that changed something. A man she didn't know, burly, wearing an expensive watch, with the air of someone whose wealth was recent enough to still feel like a disguise. He stopped next to Daniel near the bar and looked him up and down once slowly, the way you might look at something you're deciding whether to touch. "You're the mechanic," the man she married said. Daniel looked at him blankly. "Yeah, you drove the car here, too?" He laughed. It was a sound designed to be heard, and it was heard by the small group of people standing nearby. "Or did you just park it?" Emma heard it from a meter away. She had spent her entire life navigating rooms like this one. She knew exactly how to smooth things over, how to step aside, how to redirect, and how to protect everyone, including the person being insulted from the indignity of a scene. She went very still, then stepped forward and ran her hand down Daniel's arm. In effect, clearly with a small radius of people who had registered exchange, he is my husband, he is. And if you want to keep your invitation to next year, I suggest you remember it. The man blinked. The group of guests nearby found other things to look at. Daniel did not react, at least not visibly, but she felt the light pressure of her hand on his arm. The something was shifting along, almost invisible exhalation, like a man holding something, exhalation like a man. The man who's been holding something back for a long time just let it out a little. The man blinked. A long, almost invisible exhale, like a man who has been holding something in for a long time and has just let it out a little. Later, in the car she was driving, he let it out, which had become his habit, though he had never mentioned it. He stared at the road and said nothing for a long time. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know. Thank you." He changed lanes. The city lights spread out in orange spots on the wet pavement. "I'm sorry," she said, that I didn't do it sooner." He didn't answer, but he didn't look away from the window either. That was the first real moment, she thought. That was where it all started. She wasn't one to let things go by nature. On the Friday after the gala, while Daniel was at the workshop and Lily was at school, Emma sat at her desk with her second cup of coffee and her best investigative instincts and began pull at the threads. Daniel Hay. The name was completely absent from the internet. There were just the right number of records, public records of the kind that anchor a person to the world, but the deeper you dug, the stranger it got. Tax returns, business license for the workshop, registered 6 years ago, a school enrollment record for Lily, a previous address in a different city. Before that, almost nothing. A gap of almost 3 years, and before that gap, she almost missed it. The article was buried in a paywalled archive of a financial magazine that she had to log into for old analyst credentials. It was dated 11 years ago. The headline read, "The CEO of Hay Capital Partners disappears from public life, leaving behind a mystery involving 7 figures." He read it 3 times. Daniel Alexander Hayes, 29 at the time of the article, founder and chief executive officer of Hay Capital Partners, a venture capital and private equity firm that in less than 4 years of operation had generated drawn comparisons to the early careers of the country's most celebrated investors. The article estimated that at the time of his disappearance from public view, the entities he controlled directly and through proxies represented between $3 billion and $5 billion in capital. He had left without announcement, without a press release, without more than the bare minimum of regulatory filings. He had transferred operational control of everything, installed an independent board, established and evolved a structure of exceptional complexity, and vanished. The article speculated about exhaustion, mental health, a personal crisis. There were carefully worded hints of betrayal. Someone close to him, someone in the top management of his own firm who had acted against him in some significant way. The details were not public. The legal proceedings, if any, had been resolved privately. She had walked away from billions of dollars and built a quiet life in a bungalow featuring a green front door, driftwood, wind chimes, and a young daughter who truly loved the deep sea. Emma sat back in her chair, thinking about the phone call she had overheard. The comment about the cap rate, the anonymous fund that had materialized overnight to save her family's business. She thought about the worn boots, the mended shoes, the 2 cups of tea on a night when everything was falling apart. She thought about the question he had asked her, is this what you wanted? Or is this what you were supposed to want? She closed her laptop, sat for a long time thinking about what it meant to choose smallness on purpose, to earn the To be ordinary, to protect a child from a world that had used you in every way possible. Okay. She thought about her own reasons for marrying him. The coercion, the obligation, the absence of any other path. And for the first time, she felt a deep, uncomfortable shame. The Capital Global Forum was held once a year in a glass and steel tower in the financial district. And Emma had attended because one of the Whitfield Group's institutional partners had specifically asked her to, and because she was trying to demonstrate that the company still had leadership that stood up. She hadn't expected Daniel to be there. She hadn't expected the conference to have an upper level behind the credentialed access floor organized around keynote appearance by a figure identified only in the program as a founding partner of HCAP Holdings. She didn't connect the dots until she was already in the elevator going up. The doors opened onto a large, high-ceiling space, arranged with the austere precision of an event designed for people who didn't need to be impressed. No red carpet, no fancy floral arrangements, just clean sight lines, clever lighting, and a room full of people who collectively controlled a significant percentage of the world's money. Emma took a glass of water from a passing tray. She found her seat near the center of the room. She looked at the empty podium. The lights changed. The room fell silent. A door to the left of the stage opened. Daniel entered. He was wearing a suit I had never seen him wear before. Dark charcoal, perfectly tailored, the kind of thing that disappears from a body because it fits too well to announce itself. His hair was the same. His jaw had the same profile. His hands moved the same way, unhurried, set. He wore nothing, but the room rose to greet him. No one literally stood, but something moved among the assembled guests like a tide-changing direction. Chairs straightened. Heads turned, conversations ended mid-sentence. Emma's glass of water, which she had raised halfway to her lips, stopped there. She reached the podium, looked out over the room. His eyes scanned the space with the calm of someone who had been in rooms like this before and found them unremarkable. Then his eyes met hers. She didn't move. He didn't move either. Half a second, the length of a heartbeat, then he looked away and said into the microphone with the same calm composure he used to tell Lily that, yes, something probably lived on the ocean floor. Let's get started. Emma sat for 40 minutes listening to the most precise and quietly devastating analysis of global capital flows she had ever heard from a living person. All around her, people who moved markets for a living were scribbling in notebooks. Some had their tape recorders out was against the protocol posted on the door, and no one stopped them. Afterward, as the room reshaped itself into conversation, she didn't move toward him. She waited. He came to her. "Emma," he said. "Daniel," she said. They stood a meter apart. The noise in the room moved around them like water around two still stones. "How long have you known?" he asked. "A few days," she said. "I found the article." He nodded, looked at the floor briefly, then back at her. "I was going to tell you." "When?" "When I was sure it was safe." "Safe for whom?" "For Lily," he said simply. "For the life we built." She looked at him. The same face she had looked at across a breakfast table for weeks, across a dinner table, in a car, in a hallway, the same face she had scorned and appraised, and which she had only recently begun to see for what it truly was in a way. "I didn't know," she said, "when I married you." "I didn't know." "I know," he said. "That's not it." He stopped. He started again. "That's not all I mean." "I know that too," he said. "But this probably isn't the place." Around them, people were starting to look curious, calculating, reading the body language of the man they had all just seen dominating a room and the woman who stood near him. "Let's go home," he said. It was the first time Emma realized, as they walked to the door, that she had thought of the bungalow with the green front door and the driftwood wind chimes as a home. They drove home in silence. Lily was at a friend's house, a planned sleepover that now seemed to Emma like it had been arranged by the universe to give them exactly this window of time. Inside, Daniel went into the kitchen, heard him filling the kettle. She stayed in the living room and looked at the framed drawings on the wall, Lily's drawings in a mix of crayons and watercolors, a whale, a volcano, a figure he clearly intended to be her father, drawn very tall and very kind. She heard him set 2 cups down on the counter. He went into the kitchen. "Tell me," she said. He leaned against the counter and looked at her with the same steadfastness he had always had. "But do less or no armor now. I built the fan with 2 people," he said. "My best friend from college and a woman I'd been with for 4 years. It was the 3 of us from the beginning." 5 years later, they moved capital from client accounts into a vehicle that controlled about 12% of the fund. It was done carefully. It would have been invisible to most auditors, but not to you, not to me. What happened? I dissolved the partnership, settled privately, paid back every investor from my own personal funds, and then I walked away. He picked up his cup. Lily was 2 years old. Her mother had passed away the year before. That's another story. And I had just spent 6 months watching 2 people I loved treat Gatti trust like a tool. I was fed up. Emma didn't say anything. She didn't want Lily to grow up in that world. She said the world where money is the reason for everything, where every relationship is a position, where people smile at you and calculate you at the same time. He paused. I grew up with comfort. She grew up knowing exactly what she was worth to the people around her, and she wasn't. He paused. I just wanted her to have real things, a real life, real people. Emma looked at the lobster magnet on the fridge, the wax whale on the wall, and the deal with my family. He said marriage. He put the cup down. Your Uncle Clifford came to me. He knew who I was. He'd done business with one of my old partners years ago. He figured if he could structure a deal through the holding companies that was publicly associated with a nobody, it would be invisible to your family's competitors. He stared at her. I didn't want it. I said no twice. What changed? He showed me your file, Daniel said. Not yours, the company's. The people who would lose their jobs. The foundation's programs. A pause. And then he told me what they were going to ask you to do. Emma went very still. I said I would only do it if you freely agreed. He said, he told me you would do it. I didn't believe all of it. I didn't accept it freely. I know that. I had no choice. I know that too. He looked at her directly. That's why I tried to make the house as habitable as I could. I know I can undo circumstances. She thought of the meals, the coffee, already made, the shoes mended, the 2 cups of tea on the worst night. You were trying to be decent to me, she said. Yes, because you felt guilty. Yes, and why? He paused. Why? He was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Not weaker, but more exposed. Because about 2 weeks later, I stopped feeling guilty and began to simply want to do it. Emma looked at him. I wanted to make the coffee, she said. I wanted to fix the shoes. I didn't do it because you'd been hurt. I did it because... He looked at her hands, then back up. Did you eat the eggs? You said yes to Lily when she asked about Maria's dregs. You stood up for me in that room even when you still thought I was a nobody. You didn't have to. That was instinct. she said. I know, and instinct tells you things. Emma put down her own cup, looked at the man across the kitchen, the man with the quiet voice and the patient hands, and the daughter, who saw things clearly and with great love. I was wrong about you, he said. From the beginning, in every way. You were working with what you had. That's generous. That's accurate. He almost smiled. You're not that far off, Emma. You just had the wrong facts. She felt something stir in her chest. Not the desperate clinging emotion of someone needing rescue. Something quieter, more enduring. I don't know what this is, she said between us. Me neither, but I think I'd like to find out honestly, without the circumstances. He looked at her for a long moment. Me too. Outside, a car passed by on the quiet street. The wind chimes on the porch rattled faintly. Preston Hill did not accept defeat gracefully. It had taken him 3 weeks to identify ACP's holding structure and trace it back to Daniel. When he did, he had acted fast because men like Preston Hale were dangerous not in spite of their predictability, but because of it. He did what he always did. He pulled every favor, every pressure point, every buried piece of information that could be used as a weapon. He had someone inside Daniel's old firm, a relic of the original betrayal, that he still held old resentments. Within 48 hours of being triggered, that someone had leaked a story to a financial news outlet, allegations of securities violations in the fund's original dissolution, old allegations that had been resolved and buried privately, now resurrected and recast to you. The story broke on a Thursday morning. Emma found out at 7 a.m. when her phone started ringing. She read the article at the kitchen table while Daniel made Lily's school lunch. She read it twice, then put the phone down and looked at it. You know this, she said. I know, he said. He sealed Lily's sandwich bag and stuffed it into his backpack. Isn't that right? Don't you have the documentation to prove it? Everything was preserved. Every communication, every transaction record, she said. My lawyers have it on file since the settlement. She thought fast. So the story dies the moment we publish it, but they'll know. Which means this isn't the real attack. This is the distraction. He looked at her. What else is Hale moving? She said. They spent the next hour at the kitchen table. They had driven Lily to the neighbor's house who drove the carpool, 2 laptops open between them. Emma tracked the market movements. Daniel made 3 calls, short and pointed, to people he now understood weren't simply auto industry contacts. By 9:30, he had it. Hell was using the media buzz to create a window. While the focus was on the stock story, his group was moving to acquire a 40% stake in one of the Wirame Field Group's key operating subsidiaries from a minority shareholder who was being quietly pressured. Once he had that position, the Whitfield Group would face a governance blockade, and Daniel's holding companies, which had been structurally linked to Whitfield's recovery, would be dragged into the fray. He's not trying to destroy you, Emma said. He's trying to trap you, force you out into the open, make you fight publicly. Daniel stared at the screen. His jaw was set. If you fight publicly, Emma continued, you lose the life you've built, everything you've chosen. And if I don't fight, he said, it costs you the company all over again. She looked at him. Leave it to me, Emma. Let me handle the subsidiary blockade, she said. I know that shareholder, Theodore Marsh. We've met 3 times at various events. His daughter has been at school with me for a year. He was already composing the call in his head, reading the angles. He's being pressured because he believes there's no advantage in loyalty. I can give him an advantage. you'd be walking into Hale's crossfire. I know it. He'd come at you personally. He might try. She glared at him. You protected my family's company when I had nothing to offer you. When I paused, when I was treating you badly, you did it because it was the right thing to do. Let me do one thing because it's the right thing to do. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Okay, he said. She called Theodore Marsh at 10. By 11, she was in a car. By 2 p.m., she was sitting across a conference table from a 70-year-old man who had built his stake in the Whitfield subsidiary through 4 decades of patient relationship building and who was deeply and visibly uncomfortable with what was being asked of him. He didn't make her a proposal. He didn't negotiate. He told her the truth about the lobbying campaign, about Hale's intentions, about what would happen to the subsidiary if it were absorbed into Hale's structure. And then he told her what he could offer. Daniel's holding companies would take a protective position in his portfolio, insulating 3 other assets he owned from the market volatility that was clearly coming. He was offering her shelter in exchange for loyalty. He stared at her across the table for a long time. Your father, he finally said, never asked me for anything directly. He always sent someone. I know, she said. You're different. I'm trying to be. He signed the lockup agreement at 3:15. Hale's position was locked. By the time the financial news outlet received Daniel's legal team's response to the securities allegations, 600 pages of meticulously documented evidence, the story was already falling apart. By the end of the day, the outlet had issued a correction. By morning, 3 competing publications had published the real story. An attempt to destroy a legitimately operating investment firm through recycled and debunked allegations. Preston Hale made no public comment. He didn't need to. The silence was its own statement. Emma got home at 7:30. Daniel was in the kitchen. The lights were on, warm and yellow, and it smelled like something with herbs and garlic in the oven. And Lily was at the table doing her homework and apparently explaining with a pencil why the giant squid was an undervalued species. Emma stood in the doorway for a moment before anyone noticed her. She thought, this is real. This is what something real looks like. Lily looked up. Are you back? I'm back. Did you win? Emma looked at Daniel, who was watching her from across the kitchen with an expression she hadn't seen on his face before. Open, unguarded. Like a man who has spent years keeping a door closed and has finally, carefully let it open. Yes, Emma said. We won. 3 months later, the bungalow had changed very little. The green front door was the same. The wind chimes still moved in the coastal air when the windows were open, which was often now. The lobster magnet still held Lily's drawings to the fridge, though there were useful new ones, including one that on closer inspection appeared to the people standing on the edge of a tidal pool, 2 adults and a child with a very large crab visible in the water below. Emma had moved her office home. No, the office of the Whitfield Group had reluctantly and honestly accepted a formal role in the company's newly restructured management, but her personal consultancy, the home office had a window. Better, in any case. Daniel had built a bookcase for her that spanned the entire south wall. He had done it over 2 weekends. He had measured everything precisely and said nothing about it being a permanent fixture. She hadn't said anything either. Some things didn't need to be said out loud. The Whitfield Group was stable. Gerald Whitfield had retired gracefully, or at least as gracefully as he could muster, and had handed day-to-day control over to Emma and a new board. Emma had insisted on restructuring the charitable programs first. Her father had objected. She had proceeded anyway. Patricia had sent flowers when Emma's name had come up in a business profile. Emma had sent a polite thank you card. She hadn't spoken to Clifford directly. That was still complicated. It would remain complicated for some time. Emma was working on coming to terms with that. Daniel had not returned to public life. He had made a statement through his legal team after the Hal affair, confirming his identity and his continued operating role at dedica CP Holdings. It said nothing about his personal circumstances. It was precisely calibrated to give the minimum amount of information necessary to close the chapter. He still worked at the shop 3 days a week. He had attempted to quit and had realized that he was missing it. The specific satisfaction of having something broken become functional, of a problem having a real solution. Emma had once deliberately passed the shop on her way to a meeting. She had seen him through the open garage doors, hunched over an engine in his overalls, talking to the customer, who was a young woman with a worried expression and an old sedan that had obviously become unreliable at the worst possible time. She had watched him listen to the woman describe the sound the engine made with a nod, then say something that visibly relaxed the woman's shoulders. Emma had been sitting in her car at a red light and had felt something so sharp and so silent that she hadn't tried to name it. It was a Saturday in late June when she told him. Lily was in the Maria pools with a neighbor's family, her first trip without a father, which she had pushed through with the single-minded determination of someone who had inherited her father's focus on get what she wanted. Daniel had agreed. Emma had made Lily recite the safety rules twice. They were on the porch, late. The air had that quality it sometimes had in early summer, as if the day couldn't bring itself to end. Emma was reading. Daniel was doing nothing in particular, which was something she had come to recognize as one of his true skills, the ability to be genuinely still without it being a void. He put the book down. "I've been thinking," she said. "Okay," he said. About what I want, not what the company needs. Not what my family needs. What I want." He looked at her. "You want to stay," she said. "Not by any arrangement, not by circumstance, because I choose to." He fell silent. "I want to be here," she said, "in this house with Lily." He looked at his hands. "With you, Emma," he said. "I know it's not. No, things are still complicated. I know there's no clean way to separate what was forced from what became real, but I think..." He stopped. He started anew. "I think what's made real is more real than what's forced. I think that's true for both of us." He looked at her for a long time. "It's true for me," he said. "Then I'd like to try it," she said. "Honestly, from the beginning, more or less, without the architecture of other people's decisions." He reached across the small distance between their chairs and took hers. Not dramatically, not with the weight of a gesture designed to be witnessed. Just a quiet, deliberate thing. His hand, warm, calloused, and completely steady, closing around hers. She looked at his hands, looked at him. "Okay," he said. Lily came home at 7, sunburned and elated, carrying a jar of a hermit crab that she'd been explicitly told she couldn't take home. She'd taken it anyway with a detailed explanation that implied the crab appeared to be injured and therefore required observation. Daniel looked at the crab for a moment. "We'll talk about the rules," she said. But one night, Lily beamed. She set the jar down on the kitchen table, then looked at Emma with the direct intensity she sometimes displayed without warning. "Are you staying?" Emma asked. She looked at this small, serious, open-hearted person who had looked at her on her first day in this house and offered to show her to her room. Yes," Emma said. I'll stay. Lily considered it. Then she nodded, with the air of someone whose assessment had been confirmed rather than someone receiving startling news. Okay, she said. The crab's name is Copernicus. Absolutely not, Daniel said. It looks like Copernicus. It doesn't look like anything yet. It's a crab. The laugh came out easier than she expected, fuller, less constructed. A real sound in a real cane with a yellow wall, a fruit bowl, and a jar on the table containing an illegally adopted hermit crab. Daniel looked at her when she laughed. He didn't say anything, but she saw it, that thing behind his eyes, the silent, enormous thing, and she didn't look away. Later, after Lily was in bed and Copernicus had been moved to the porch with ventilation and fresh water, about which Lily had given very specific instructions, Emma stood at the kitchen window and looked out over the dark garden, and Daniel stood beside her. They were silent together for a while, in the way they had learned, the way that meant something rather than nothing. I thought I was going to lose everything, she said. My family's business, the life I had been told I was supposed to have. I know. And instead I stopped, looked at the garden. I ended up here. Is that worse? She turned to look at him. No, she said. It's the best thing that ever happened to me. I just didn't know it yet. He looked at her. Outside, wind chimes stirred the driftwood, and sea glass making the own specific little music in the darkness. The man who had chosen smallness on purpose. The woman who had first learned to choose. The girl who had known all along that this was where the good stuff was. A house with a green front door, a jar on the porch, a crab named Copernicus, probably all real, all chosen, all finally hers.